Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from One Rock, an alliance of regional economic development organizations, investors, and institutions committed to building Greater Rochester's economic future and driving coordinated growth. Information online at oneroc.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Julie Philipp, filling in for Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour started as an empty page waiting to be filled. That's how every book begins. But what new authors soon learn is that finishing a book does not mean they're done with the book. Not even close. Not if they want someone to read it. The next step is publication, turning the manuscript into a hardcover, a paperback, an ebook, an audiobook. By some accounts, the odds of getting picked up by a traditional major publisher like Penguin Random House or HarperCollins might be lower than your odds of getting struck by lightning in your lifetime. But in some ways, the path to publication is easier than ever today. There are several other avenues, including smaller presses, and more authors are self-publishing their own work. But there's downsides to all of these approaches. One of the biggest for indie and self-published books, they're often much harder for readers to find. What is a book without a reader? Anyone who has written a first book knows how daunting this process is and how important it is to find or create a supportive community to help them through it. We are going to talk about all of that today with some local authors. My guests today include Tyler Barton, Artistic Director of Writers and Books. He is a writer, teacher, and literary advocate. He's the author of Eternal Night at the Nature Museum and The Quiet Part Loud. He worked with independent publishers to get those short story and flash fiction books out into the world. And Aries Jordan, a local educator and writer who self-published a collection of poetry called Journey to Womanhood, a Poetic Rite of Passage. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I'm really excited about this conversation. And I have to do a full disclosure up front here. This was Evan's idea. He reached out to you. But strangely enough, I am just finishing my first work of fiction, my first novel. So it feels a little self-serving, but I'm going to try really hard not to make it about me today. So let's start with you guys. When you started your books, what was on your mind? Were you thinking you wanted to be the next John Cheever or Maya Angelou, big name bestseller? And without giving too much away right here at the top of the show, did it turn out the way you thought it would? Why don't we start with you, Aries?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. And I initially published Journey to Womanhood in 2011. So a really long time ago. And what started as a lifelong journey of writing my whole life of journals, poems. And I met my mentor at a festival who had like a plethora of books. And he said, "Where's your book at?" And said, "You can self-publish," which is something that I just thought would be later on in life. Mm-hmm. And when the opportunity presented itself, I had all these poems, body of work that I just didn't really know what to do with. So I said yes. And was it what I expected? Absolutely not. And but it was everything that I needed and more than what I could have expected.
Okay, I'm looking forward to getting into that. How about you, Tyler?
I started writing really just because I wanted to be part of the conversation. I've always found a home appreciating and talking about literature with other people, being in classrooms talking about books. And every time I would walk into a bookstore, I'd see all the names on the shelves and just think like, I'd love to have even just one sliver of that, just like have my name there. So I started writing short stories, publishing them in literary magazines with the hopes of collecting those stories one day and publishing them. I did explore traditional publishing options, and I ended up at an indie press. So we can talk about the difference between big four publishers and indies and university presses. But a lot of people who, like I did, I went to graduate school, got an MFA in creative writing. A lot of people end up going in an indie route, at least for some of their earlier works. So
okay. So when I tell someone I'm writing a book, they always say, "Oh, I can't wait to read it." There's just very little understanding out there about what the process is. That walking into a brick and mortar store and finding your own book is kind of like, anywhere in America is kind of like, walking to a stable and there's a unicorn with a rainbow mane, it's pretty daunting. How do you deal with that when people say, "Hey, I want to read,
Yeah, well, I can speak to that a little bit. When I published with an indie publisher, which is absolutely like they make great books. It's high quality product. They have wide distribution throughout the country. My book, the year that it came out, was in a number of bookstores, especially indie bookstores, where I could go in and find my book in the store. And probably less so in Barnes and Noble. They're very bigger stores like that. They're really selling books that where authors have a little bit more are a little bit more well known, maybe not as many debut authors and on indie presses. But so the book was in indie bookstores for a while. I think my book is about 4 years old now, and it's probably not in so many indie bookstores anymore. But I still have copies of it that when I go to readings, I can hand sell copies. And yeah, any bookstore anywhere can order it quickly because it can be found through Ingram and all of the normal distribution sources.
So not impossible. How about you? How are people finding you?
Through Amazon KDP that I've seen. Just working with that platform allows it to be accessible, and I haven't had took the route of indie bookstores. It's really just self-promotion and collaboration and connection. And if people want to find my book, they can go on Amazon.
Okay, so all online.
Yes.
Everything. Okay, so before we talk about the alternatives, you called them the big four. To me, it's the big five. I don't know which one I'm adding there, but it's a Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Hachette Book Group, and I also have Simon and Schuster in there. Is there someone in there you're not counting as one of the big
I believe that
publishers?
Simon and Schuster is now part of Penguin Random House.
Oh,
but I
okay,
could
so
be wrong.
it's always changing. I
Yeah.
could be wrong too. So let's talk about why you and frankly most authors don't go this route. It's hard. It's hard, but obviously not impossible.
I think that in terms of self-publishing, correct?
No, going with a major publisher.
I think that it's the security of it, the distribution. Really, the ones that you mentioned, they have different connections and distribution and having your book out there. So I think that security of knowing that someone's gonna market and distribute it to major bookstores, and for you to see your name on the shelves. So I definitely understand the why.
The why. But,
Yes.
but most people don't go that route. Do you want to talk a little bit about why that is?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of reasons. So there can be a bit of gatekeeping with major publishers. I mean, they only want to bring on books that they think are going to resonate with an audience, and they have a lot of research based on who's buying books and what those people are interested in. So they're sometimes using market-driven data to drive some of their decisions about what they want to publish. And not everyone's book fits kind of like what's buzzy or topical. So there can be a bit of gatekeeping, which will cause some people sometimes to look for smaller publishers or consider self-publishing as well. I think there's an argument to be made that gatekeeping, if you want to call it that, I guess that has kind of a negative connotation, but like discerning which books should be published and which ones shouldn't, there is a place for that, and I think we need that. But these are all part of like a large literary ecosystem that leads to, I think it's like right now like 3 million books are published every year. So like,
Right.
And 40 years ago, there were like 20,000 books being published every year. So there's been an explosion, and we can talk about, the AI piece of that too.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot to that.
But I think there'll always be a place for major publishers to be discerning and really concerned with prestige and making sure they're publishing what is either the best stuff or the most likely to sell stuff.
Because at the end of the day, it is a business,
Right.
They to stay in business, they have to sell books, so they do tend to be a little more formulaic and like well-known names that are already familiar to audiences and that kind of thing. So, so then you find yourself looking elsewhere. So let's start with smaller independent presses. How is it different, and what was your experience like?
Yeah, I think small and indie presses is that's the place in the literary ecosystem that I live and breathe. That's I think some of the most interesting work is coming out of indie and small presses. They're much more open to experimentation, and there are so many of them, and they're all over the country, that it creates for a lot of diversity, and a lot of voices that maybe get missed by the big publishers can find homes at smaller and indie presses. There's also a lot of opportunity. Many of these indie presses have open calls for books, so they'll say, this year, between this month and this month, we're reading manuscripts in these categories. Send us your manuscript. Sometimes there's a fee involved in that because it's a fee to have somebody read your book. There's labor involved in that. So I think it's worth it. But and then sometimes they're free too. They'll also have contests where you can send your finished book, and then they'll select the winner of the contest to be published by the press. And it's also all very much tied into literary magazines and journals and online publications that are taking submissions from writers for individual poems, individual stories, individual memoirs. And people can writers who are breaking in can kind of cut their teeth by publishing in smaller indie presses, literary journals and places like that, so that they can kind of build up clips, essentially, like journalists might. Like, these are, I can point to having published 8 short stories, and now maybe I'm ready to start putting the stories together into a book. So it's kind of a place to train up and get ready to be out there on the market and start to develop an audience.
But not everybody has an MFA in literary writing.
Right.
A lot of authors wouldn't be considered literature. They're more of accessible to a broader audience. I'm thinking romance novels,
Right,
a lot of the genre stuff. Is that still a route for them, then, the independent, smaller?
I think you'd be surprised. There's a website that I really recommend. It's called Chill Subs, the word chill and the word subs.com. And you can search for opportunities to submit anything from a full-length book to individual poems to thousands of different presses that have all kinds of different focuses. So there are literary journals that are publishing romance. There's a lot of literary journals and magazines that are publishing like sci-fi and things that the literary crowd might consider as genre or pulp or something. Mm-hmm. But there are spaces for that. The director of Writers and Books, Michael Solis, he's a writer himself. He was at a conference this weekend, the Nebula Conference. That's all for science fiction and fantasy writers. So there are these communities around all the different genres that are out there that you can discover through these, I say smaller, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way at all. I think it's actually like where you find your real community. Because I think we can talk too about the big fours. Like, you can feel kind of lost sometimes at a big four because anyway, I don't know. Right. I think there's a community aspect to these small presses that's really special. So,
right.
Yeah.
And you have a lot more control over your product, correct? There's a lot more negotiation in terms of the changes you make to your book, the cover, all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So when you end up finding a press that's going to publish a full-length book, my experience with indie publishing, independent presses, is that they are much more collaborative with the author than a Penguin Random House will be, especially for debut authors. Penguin Random House is not going to sit down with the debut author and say, what do you want your cover to look like? I mean, maybe they will, but they're not going to give them a lot of control. For my book, I was able to submit, here are 5 covers that I really like, that I think speak to the themes, and here's my language describing what I think my book is about. And then they went and hired a professional book cover designer to design a couple of options for covers, and then I had a say in which one we went with. So it was collaborative. I didn't have complete control, but I was very happy with the product.
More than you would have with the big four.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, so right before we get into self-publishing, one other really big difference, I think, between one of the big publishers and an independent one is the need for an agent. Did you have an agent, or you could bypass that?
I did not have an agent. So when I graduated I had a book of short stories that I was shopping around, and that means I was sending query letters to agents saying, here's my book of stories, here's what it's about, here's the first 25 pages, take a look at it. If you're into it, let's talk. And I had a couple of great conversations with agents, and most short story writers will tell you this same thing, is most of them were like, we love your stories, but let us know when you have a novel, because selling a short story collection is kind of tough. Similar with poetry, selling poetry collections can be tough. Even though Penguin Random House publishes poetry collections, it still can be a tough sell sometimes. So they were like, call us back when you have a novel. I really believed in the book, and I wanted to get the book out because I wanted it to open doors for me in other ways, to start going to conferences and doing readings and meeting other writers and kind of breaking into the industry. So I made it a point to find an indie press that would publish my story collection. And so I submitted to contests, and for a couple years got rejections from contests, and then had one contest that was like, you almost made it. You were on the finalist list. And then I submitted to them again the following year, as they suggested I do. And then the following year, I won the contest and was able to be published. So I found my way there. But I think it's good to always consider reaching out to agents first. You have to learn to write that query letter. That's a really important part of the process. And there's lots of workshops that are out there and authors who are giving advice on how to write that query letter in the most effective way that an agent's going to pay attention to it. But if the agent route doesn't really lead to a book being published, then indie and small presses are a great way to go. And then self-publishing is also becoming more and more a very common way to go.
Right.
So,
We're going to talk about that. Right now, we are talking with Writers and Books Artistic Director Tyler Barton and local educator and self-published poet Aries Jordan. If you want to join the conversation, the number is 263-9994 or 844-295-TALK is our toll-free. And the email is connections@wxxi.org. All right, let's turn to self-publishing. This has been around for a while now. It started out with a bit of a stigma. If you have to self-publish, your book isn't good enough to be out in the world. And while some quality control is an issue for some self-published books, there have been authors who have started multi-million-dollar careers there. Amanda Hocking, who started out publishing her young adult books as ebooks, and now she's on the New York Times bestseller list all the time. E.L. James, the writer behind the Shades of Grey series. So let's talk about your experience in the realm of self-publishing. It sort of landed in your lap, it sounds like. Somebody said, hey, you should try it.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, around the rejection and just kind of gatekeeping, like we've mentioned, that self-publishing has given me the opportunity to write what I want, how I want. And, when it comes to query letters, like, I haven't written a query letter because this just seemed like the most natural path for me. Like, I write about my experience navigating the world as a Black woman, how I see things, and my poetry, as Tyler mentioned, that, I don't really see as an educator, when I was in school, people saying I want to grow up to be a writer or a poet just because it's not at times sexy. But self-publishing has given me the opportunity to tell my story, tell the story in the language that I want to put out into the world. So my journey to self-publishing was, really, I would say, just the organic experience, just using just basic tools to put it together. And now it has evolved so much from over 10 years of me sitting down at a desktop computer that there's so many tools. But I just believe for so many, self-publishing is a way to kind of remove any barriers to telling your story, not having to wait for somebody's approval to say, yes, this is marketable. Yes, this makes sense. Yes, there's an audience for it. And for me, just for my book, it has really changed the way that I see the literary community and the ability to just go out there, put your words out into the world, and that I don't have any kind of agent. I don't have any like major distribution deal, but to be able to connect with people. And I think that is going to be important in the future, to be able to have those skills to connect with people, not just sending out a social media blast. Hey, I have a book out, support me, folks, but to be able to connect with people and being able to convey what is the story that you're telling in your work.
So let's get to the little bit of the nuts and bolts of self-publishing, starting with the platform. Like, how did you pick a platform? How hard was it for you to learn and do what you needed to do to self-publish your book from a technical standpoint?
From a technical standpoint, I would say the first step is you need to write. You must write. Like, there are many nuts and bolts to it, but you have to pick up the pen, you have to get on your computer, you have to just write. And then from there, in terms of after you have a body of work that you want to put together into a book, there's the editing process and finding an editor, someone that's going to read your work, because you may think it's wonderful in terms of spelling, grammar, content, but you actually need an editor to help you kind of edit your words and how it may land with the reader. And then from there, choosing where actually do I want to print my work. So printing on demand is just like that really changed the world, you know, the literary landscape of publishing and finding where do you want to send your work to print. And like I said, printing on demand, just kind of showing some of the distinctions between traditional publishing is like you had to get like a whole plethora of books, units of books that now you are responsible for selling. But printing on demand allows you to kind of grow organically or print what you need based on sales or what you're doing in the moment. And then from there, just kind of choosing a platform is the landscape has changed. So for me, Amazon KDP has like the best distribution of looking at what our literary audience wants. They want audio. They want to be able to order it with their groceries. And, you know, our users are on Amazon as opposed to some of the traditional publishing spaces that holds a traditional audience, but people are consuming it in different ways. So I think that's important, you know, as the literary landscape changes, to see where are the readers at and how are they reading.
Did you sound like you have something to throw in there?
Yeah, well, I want to say too, I think that if you're take the route of being a self-published author, you not only need to be a writer who's passionate about writing, you need to be a reader who's reading a lot, who understands the market. And you also then need to become a salesperson. So you need to know how to get out there and sell the book. And that reading piece is so important because so many people who are successful in self-publishing, they read a ton because they're not only reading because they love to read, and this is what it all comes down to, is that we love books, right? But they're also doing market research as they're reading. They're reading a bunch of books in the same genre. They're seeing where the gaps are in the market. So there's a author locally who's fairly successful at selling her self-published books, and she writes romance novels, but they're also spy novels. So it's kind of like she read a bunch of romance novels, but she's like, I don't see a lot of people kind of blending spy fiction and romance, and how can I do that? And you know, her book is one of the books this year that we've had a couple events, and it's sold more books than traditional books in our store. So the reading piece is so important because you can't be a good writer without reading. And then it's also kind of like a way for you to do market research and to know where you might find an audience.
Okay, and I want to talk about that. I'm going to read a quote here from a blogger, and then we're going to take a break, and then we're going to come back and talk about that. But this is from writer and blogger Tim Denning, who's pretty well known. He says 99% of self-published books fail, and by that he means no readers, no money. So we're going to talk about what success means too. But to him, it means it fails if there's no one reading it and you don't make any money. And he says the reason that happens, that 99% of these self-published books fail, is because, quote, the book is the least important part of the process. He says building an audience is the most important thing even before you write the book. So we're going to talk about that when we get back. We're going to take a short break now, and when we come back, we will continue our conversation with writers and book artistic director Tyler Barton and local educator and self-published poet Aries Jordan. We will be right back.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Monroe County Economic Development, accepting applications for the Micro Advantage Loan Program designed to help small businesses with expenses such as equipment upgrades, marketing, and hiring. Details at monroecountybusiness.org. And Bob Johnson Auto Group, believing an informed public makes for a stronger community. Proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, focused on the news, issues, and trends that shape the lives of listeners in the Rochester and Finger Lakes regions. BobJohnsonAutoGroup.com.
This is Connections. I'm Julie Philipp, sitting in for Evan Dawson, and today we are talking about the trials and tribulations of being a new author, trying to get your book out there for people to read. Now, we just read that quote, and before we talk about building audience and how important that is, what do you think about Tim Denning's idea of success? Is it, obviously a book needs readers. A lot of people want to make money from their books, but when you put your book out there in the world, what was your measure? Like, what were you going to consider to be a success once it was out there?
It was really, I want to sell some books. That was just straight up my measure of success, in that, in addition to selling it, I wanted to touch people's soul. So people coming up to me after like maybe a performance and sharing how it touched them, that it made them, that it provoked thought, that was my measure of success. Is like, yes, you can make money, you can be a great salesperson, but really I wanted the transformative aspect of it. I want people to leave and my words resonate. It lands. They're pondering about it. Something is shifting as they experience it. So that was my measure of success. And I think that he nailed it with that quote around self-publishing, because as Tyler gave like the stats, that more people are publishing stuff, but not understanding your audience. And I think my first time around, it was like, yeah, I wanted to resonate with people's soul. I want to sell some books. But that's what I had to learn in terms of, where's my audience outside of my supporters, my family cheering me on, and people that know me. I didn't identify my audience and how to connect with them.
And this was back in 2011 when you first put it out there.
2011. Okay. I was just excited. Wow, I'm a published author. Right. I'm selling some books. My family, friends support me. People are resonating with it.
My grandma bought it.
Yes, my grandma bought it, and whole family has copies. They still have copies like in their living room, but that is the important step of being able to identify your audience. Okay. And prior to the book.
Okay, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Let's turn to Tyler now then. So when you put your book out there, what were your measures of success? What were you hoping for?
It's much closer to the second part of what Aries was saying about connecting with people and growing my literary community. I've always been interested in writing and literary programming because there's nothing more special to me than when people are in a shared space appreciating literature, just listening to a writer talk, discussing a text, even just being in a bookstore when people are shopping. Like, to me, that's so life-affirming and life-giving. I just wanted my book to help me connect with more people that way. So it was a tool that allowed me to give readings at bookstores. I would find readers that way by giving readings and selling a couple books at the bookstore, by being invited on podcasts to talk to other writers and editors and literary critics to talk about the book. It was kind of like a way to help me get inside some rooms that introduced me to new people and just grow my literary community. I didn't have any illusions that a debut short story collection on an indie press was going to make me much money. That really honestly wasn't my goal. It was more about, it's more about what I think books are all about, which is about bringing people together. And honestly, my book has taken me to some places that I never would have expected. And it even led to a couple of people who have written me like emails saying like they love the book, sort of like a fan letter in a sense. I mean, there's not been a ton of them, but there's been at least two that I have now become close friends with somebody who reached out because they saw something in one of my stories that really spoke to them, and we've continued to be in touch. And yeah, it's led to like truly important friendships in my life, and it's really incalculable the number of other spaces I've been able to enter because I had a book to help me get there. And I think that I could do that with a self-published book as well, but it does help that when we're talking about audience, like even an indie press, my indie press, Saraband Books in Kentucky, it's been around since the early 90s. They've got a bit of an audience who turns to them every year saying like, I loved the last books you put out. I'm going to look at your catalog and see what you guys are offering this year and buy books that way. So there is a little bit of audience that the press, because of their prestige and history, that I get to tap into by being on that press. So that's like a little bit of a step up as opposed to if I just publish it myself and hope that I can reach people on social media or something. But yeah.
All right, Aries, how are you building audience this second time around?
This second time around is really being intentional that, as Tyler mentioned, I am a part of a literary web. So kind of building my audience now. I do my Just Write writing workshops. So that gives people an opportunity to write, where I'm meeting readers, writers, folks that just want to put pen to paper. Also partnering with writers and books, just kind of being exposed to the writers and books community, and also bringing people along with my journey and being like laser focused on who is this book for, because the first book was for me and that little girl who always wanted to write, but just kind of being focused on this is my upcoming book that's works in progress, is to whom much ink is given, much is required. And it is a literary companion for Black women. So really honing in on not just I want to create a book with my original poems and writing prompts for writers, but Black women writers who are underrepresented but have so much stories to tell. So just kind of even expanding it beyond Black women writers, like where are Black women at? And that's where you'll find me. Where are the allies and supporters of Black women who want to see us thrive, be creative? So just organically positioning myself to genuinely be in spaces where I would find my readers and folks who support my readers.
Mm-hmm. So I've heard a saying, the first draft of a book is for you, the writer, and the second draft is for your readers, your audience. And I'm finding that true. Back to me again for a minute.
It's okay.
That as I'm going through, I am cutting the stuff that I thought, oh, that was beautiful, a year ago. I'm like, oh, they're going to like really struggle to get through this. This is just dumb. I'm just pouring to, so I really do find that the final run through, you have to think about who's going to read it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you mentioned you're going to bookstores, you're giving talks, and you're literally selling book by book by book. Is that how one of the ways that you reach an audience? You have to get out there and have a community and find people book by book by book?
Absolutely. And I think that's why literary spaces like Writers and Books, or like any of the lovely bookstores that have popped up in Rochester over the last few years, writers who are engaged with those spaces in a way where maybe they're leading workshops there. Aris mentioned that she does these her Just Write program. She does journaling in the park, where she gets writers together to journal in the park, connect with one another. It's very much about people meeting each other and building a community around books. I just can't emphasize enough like how important that is. So a place like Writers and Books, they're offering classes, offering spaces for writers to get together to hear a reading. If you're going in and putting the time in to be part of those spaces, you're going to get a reward back from that. It's not like one-to-one, and it's not transactional, like I attended this reading, therefore everyone here has to buy my book. But like it ends up going that way because you're meeting more people, they're becoming friends, and this is really like writing is like grassroots. Like you've gotta find your community, and they're going to be the first people to support you. That's not going to be enough to get you on the New York Times bestseller list, but if you don't start with that kind of like local community support in some way, you're really I think you're unless you're just a genius. And that there's
And
always
we do have a few of
there's
those
always
in
a case
Rochester.
where
I
people
know
are
a
geniuses
couple
and like
of
they
people.
don't need, they could go to a mountaintop and write their book and then just send it to an editor and then be famous. And like
And it has happened,
it
but
has happened,
is,
but I don't.
that's even more rare
I
than
don't
the
coach
unicorn.
people to do that.
Yeah.
I coach people, go take a writing class, go to a open mic, share your work aloud. It's always good to read aloud. You like hear how an audience is responding in time. You know, it can be kind of cringy or like nerve-wracking to go to an open mic or to read your work before an audience, but I found it so instructive. It's like, oh wow, that joke doesn't land, or oh, this part's funny and I didn't realize that, or I can hear people emoting, talk to people afterwards. It's a really way to grow as a writer. So just always want to point people towards the community aspect is just so necessary. Yeah.
So we're a pretty small city. All the publishers in New York City, for me, because I have family in New York, I do go there a lot. And the community there among writers, I mean, you can be walking in and you'll be standing in the same room with a best-selling author. And so in Rochester, how do you hit on this a little bit, but how do you start building that community here, that having that support, which is so critical to the process?
For me, I'm going into my 5th year in Rochester, so that was essential to me. Is just building it brick by brick. Like no one knows me, no one knows who Aries Jordan is in Rochester. Coming from the Bay Area where I had a little bit more exposure, but for me, I wanted to be intentional, not be transactional. So for me, just my way of doing things is meeting people where they're at. So, and being kind of laser focused of, I know going into my next book, I want to incorporate journaling prompts. Where are the writers at? Outside of the institution of writing and books in the bookstore. So really taking that leap of faith with journaling in the park of just calling people together. And one thing I want to mention is people are hungry for real human connection. Yeah. And I think that we have to keep that at the center. Is yes, we could do virtual readings, but people want to touch, feel books again. They want to touch and feel people again. So for me, it was just kind of putting out there, let me just put out a call and see where my nature lovers, where my people who are reading enthusiasts, people who always have like scribbling notes. So kind of removing the idea of people creating poetry in the park, because I wanted to reduce the barriers people that may come up with just writing. So just being organic and meeting your audience where they're at. And over the winter, I did Frost and Rite. For people just wintering the weather blues, just like me, who just, maybe inside not writing. So I think that whether it's romance novels, sci-fi, I've done a series, Black Futures Over Fear, encouraging people to write in Black speculative fiction. So I think it's really whatever it is that you're going to be putting your book, whatever you're going to be crafting your book about. You have to think about, where are these folks at? Yeah. Are they at the bookstores? What would be their call to action? What would get me out the house to write? And I'm like, being in the park, just getting a journal, not a lot of stress. In the wintertime, being at a cozy bookshop and writing and just being amongst my fellow creatives.
And so you kind of called them to you, and they showed up.
Yes.
Right? Okay, great. How about you? What would you recommend to people looking to build a community around themselves?
Right. I'll think back to when I first started writing and publishing stories. Out of college, I wrote a lot in college, but didn't do much publishing. But as I was a college graduate, I was wondering, I'm writing short stories and flash fiction. I wonder who else in the city that I lived in is doing this. Started going to bookstores, seeing that there were flyers for readings, going to those readings, hearing someone read from their book of short stories, buying it, reading the book, but also paying attention to the back page of the book that shows where those stories were published, like what the names of the journals were, looking those journals up online, being like, when do they have open submissions that I can submit my short story? So it's like, again, a way of meeting people, but always also kind of doing research. And it's like, I don't ever want to I've moved a number of times as a writer, so I always find myself in new literary communities. I never want to come in and just be like, I write short stories and I gather people for readings, and everyone should pay attention to me because I invented this. It's like, I knew moving to Rochester, there's a lot of people writing already who have 8-10 books out. These are people who I want to meet and understand kind of where my place, where I can fit in, where I can be helpful. One thing I did early on in my career was these writers I would meet at bookstores or through writing workshops or things at the library. I would interview them I just had a blog on my website and where I would just interview people who were doing literary stuff around town. And that helped me to grow my network. And I've kind of kept that similar style wherever I move, is really try to learn what's there first, get a lay of the land before I start being like, okay, and now pay attention to me. So.
And can I just add one more thing? I think what Tyler said is so essential of learning the literary landscape. And also, in addition to the research, is you have to be a part of that community, that it has to be reciprocal. Not just to grab and be seen, but really reciprocal in your relationships with your fellow artists. And I like what you said about interviewing folks, that people tend to be generous, but they're often not asked, and see how you can also show up for your literary community as well.
Great. We are talking to Tyler Barton, who is artistic director with Writers and Books, and Aries Jordan, who is a local writer, educator, self-published poet. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about distribution. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about how books are sold and how they get out there, how they're marketed. Even if you are with one of the major traditional publishers and you get an advance, it doesn't mean that all those books are going to sell, right? Can you talk about, either one of you, talk a little bit about that?
For sure. Yeah. So if you end up, you have your book, you've reached out to an agent, you've got an agent, and then your agent takes your book out to market, which is that they try to sell it to publishers. A publisher buys it and you get a contract and a deal. And then, in probably 2 years, the book is going to actually come out. So one thing to keep in mind always is that it's a really long process. It takes you that long to write the book, takes you so long to find an agent and then to shop it and then for it to actually come out. An important thing to keep in mind is that at those big four publishers, you are one of a million books that are coming out. I mean, a million, I'm using a hyperbole, but because I know a lot of the 3 million that are published come out self-published, but most of these publishers put out a lot of books. And even in your specific genre of surrealist fiction, there's still going to be 30 books of that type that publisher puts out this year. So you are not going to necessarily, especially as a debut author, get a ton of attention marketing wise from them. They are going to be able to make sure that your book is in certain bookstores, but self-publishing, you can make sure that your book is available for purchase online from Barnes & Noble, from Books A Million, from bookshop.org very easily. But the big publishers, they will help you as much as they can, but they have a marketing budget that they've got to divvy up, and James Patterson gets this much of it, and then all of the other writers get this little bit. Right. So you might get an ad in Poets and Writers magazine, or some featured in email newsletters. Maybe they'll help you with some social media. But again, even if you're publishing with Penguin Random House, which is a lot of people's dreams, and you get in advance, you still have to go out and sell your book as well. Now, you don't have to walk the book into bookstores and say, will you sell this on consignment? It's easy for the bookstore to just order it online. But you are still going to need to reach out to places and be like, can I do a reading there? I get emails all the time from writers, everyone from self-published writers to indie presses to academic university presses to the big four, reaching out saying, hey, can I do a reading at Writers and Books? So you're still going to have to do some work to get the book out there. But the big thing that you're getting from publishing with a big four, even with an indie press, is that you don't have to worry about the nuts and bolts of how are the bookstores going to order it from the distributor? All of that is kind of taken care of for you. And I know that KDP makes that fairly easy as well. I see more and more often self-published books that are findable easily on all of the major websites that sell books, so you can order books. But I don't know all the details of how that happens, but I think it's fairly simple with their online.
But people just have to know to go look for it, more or
Right,
less.
yeah. So
right?
how do you drive them to that link is, yeah, it's tough because social media even is a different landscape than it used to be. It used to be like really anyone can go viral at any time on social media, and it's the Wild West. And we know that really, unless there's a lot of money going into something, or you just happen to hit like this perfect nerve of like you posted the greatest thing.
You get lucky and viral.
Yeah,
that's
it's really hard to go get lucky and go viral anymore. So again, it's about building that audience from the ground up, and then making sure that what you're putting out into the world is high quality. People judge books very quickly. I judge books immediately upon seeing them. But I've seen Big Four books that have been proofread 3 times and they've been fact checked, and I see errors in them. I see self-published books that have the same problem. So yeah, it comes back to quality. And I love that Aries said earlier, it always begins with, you have to write a really good book, and that doesn't happen fast, and it usually doesn't happen alone. It usually happens from taking classes and doing things that you can do to improve your craft. And I know some of those things require funds, and not everybody has money, but there are ways that you can find affordable things to do. Even at Writers and Books, the classes we offer, we always offer scholarships to people who can't afford to pay but want to work on their craft. So yeah, I'm rambling a little bit, but there's a lot to it. Yeah.
There is a lot, and we could probably spend 2 or 3 hours on all of this. We have a little bit of time, and I want to talk about AI, particularly as it is disrupting the self-publishing world. It's easy to spot a lot of them when somebody's literally dumping 10 books a day onto a platform. But there's really no surefire way to detect which books are AI. But there's tons more books now being published. One problem, how do you, a real author with quality work, stand out? And also there's concern that so much of AI material is not quality that eventually platforms like Barnes & Noble and Amazon are not going to take those anymore because it's just too much garbage, so to speak, going out there. So talk about that. What are your fears with AI? What do you see happening? How will it impact the world of new authors trying to get their books out there?
I think that is like something that I'm contending with now, as I release, this work's in progress. How much of AI will I use, and what separates me when I say I'm a poet, when I say I'm a writer? What separates me from AI? And I've definitely been contending and grappling with that. And what I resolved with is I am a writer. It is a gift. And like Tyler said, of producing a quality body of work, being intentional, applying my MFA skills. And I have a duty as a proclaimed writer and poet to invest in my literary community. And it's a slower process. Like, I worked with Coach Ebony, who is a phenomenal writing coach. Instead of throwing my ideas for this book into ChatGPT, which I use regularly, but I said, no, I want to work with the writing coach who helped me shape the book, my idea for this upcoming book, and honing in on my audience. And then when it comes to editing, I can easily throw it into ChatGPT, but I am resolving not to do that and work with a human editor. So I know that there is some kind of disclaimers people can put out, like, it was written by AI. So I want to put in my disclaimer, this is written by humans.
A human touch on
yes,
every
a human
step.
touch on every step as far as I can go with this book and being intentional. And I just say that sharing with one of my MFA, I went as far as getting a MFA in creative writing, and I'm still connected to my cohort, and we talk about AI a lot. And I said, what do you guys think about AI in the future of writing? And one profoundly said that still resonates with me is that the future of the literary community is what we make it. as writers, as readers, as editors, as coaches. It is what we make it. And to continue to make sure we put our investment in the human touch and human connection as it evolves, and see which aspect it will be non-negotiable if we consider ourselves writers.
I think that's a great way to nearly end the program, but Writers and Books has a poetry festival coming up.
Yeah, so this week we are celebrating the 3rd annual Flower City Poetry Festival. It's at Highland Park Bowl. Aries will be on our first night lineup, reading alongside Willow Carroll and Sarah Freely. So it's 3 nights of poetry and live music at the park, at the Bowl in Highland Park. If we have bad weather, we're going to...
When is it again?
Oh, sorry. Yes, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So that is June 10th, June 11th, and June 12th.
This week.
Wednesday,
Thursday, Friday this week.
Yeah,
okay.
So we'll be there. If we get bad weather, we'll make a big announcement that we're moving to the 3rd Presbyterian Church. But we have the State Poet Laureate, Kimiko Hahn, coming to Rochester to read on Friday night, and Cornelius Eady, who is a Rochester-based, actually Rochester-born and raised writer, is now in New York City. He read the inaugural poem at Zohran Mamdani's inauguration in January, so we're so happy to have him back. And yeah, we hope you'll join us. It's free to attend, and it's lovely.
Great, and I hope the weather holds, because that bowl is such a nice place to sit and listen to poetry. And so we are out of time. I would like to thank my guest, Writers and Books Artistic Director Tyler Barton, and local educator and self-published poet Aries Jordan. And I'd also like to thank our team running the show, and you, our listeners. Have a wonderful day.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Eben Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.